In a world of fractured stories, timelines buried, and truths erased, one project dares to ask the question, what if everything you thought you knew about history was wrong? This is GTR, Genesis, Timeline and Roots. A 5,025-year simulated walkthrough tracing a melanated Adam back to 4000 BC. Over the last decade, new revelations confirm a black origin for humanity, from European vaults to tribal memory, Babylon to Britain. This is not just history, this is a challenge, a simulation, a movement. Meet the man behind GTR, Dr. Wilton MacDonald II, Caymanian, British, Jamaican, haplogroup E and stateless for 26 years. Now a global explorer, 119 countries and counting. A hedge fund lawyer, a UK chartered accountant, a seeker of the lost archives of our people. But the question remains, if all black people came out of Africa, does that make us only African? Or are we also European, Scottish, Native American, Jacobite Hebrew, Asian? GTR exists to answer that question. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. A splinter in your mind. That splinter has brought you here, to GTR. Whites can't trace their roots before the 1800s. Where's ours? Where are the tribes? The languages, the kings, the queens, the true Hebrews? Where did the giants go? Where are the Neanderthals? Angels, aliens? Why do we speak in so many tongues? Was Babel just a myth? A memory? History has holes. Hollywood has lied. The system was never made for us to remember. Only 5 to 8% of people today are white. And what about the 1800 stories and postcards of the cabbage babies? But nearly all history books center their story. That doesn't add up. Atlantis, lost cities, vanished civilizations, or were they erased? Try GTR. Take the red pill and awaken to the truth of your ancestors. Or take the blue pill and keep dreaming a fantasy. GTR. A simulated walkthrough of Black Hebrew history and eschatology. This is the beginning of remembering.
Well, hello again, K-Man. This is your host, Dr. Wilton MacDonald II, and happy to present Genesis Timeline Roots, GTR, Episode 11, The Colonization of Africa. And first, let's just dive into some news. Now, fellow genealogist Paul Crooks, I attended one of his seminars about a week ago, and he has some interesting information connecting his roots, the Crooks roots, to Africa, and it's on paper. And Paul and I have spoken many times. He does not trace his lineage using any form of DNA. And I said clearly that that's limited because you have to use a combination of sources. As any good researcher, you need to look at both DNA, the records, and here it is that in GTR, we're challenging a lot of this historical narratives of the primary sources being tested. So Paul is having some challenges with his information, said it's being utilized on the net, and then his optimization on the internet. The search engine optimization is not yielding a lot of results for him. Again, he's going to take a step back and produce less content. But I wish him well, and I just hope that he would connect with me and do his DNA and determine the haplogroups. It's great to follow in that footsteps of Alex Haley in Roots, but as you know, like Dr. Henry Gates and others who are following Roots, it is an exercise in futility. There was no Kunta Kinte. There was really, Roots was based on fabricated, plagiarized material, and it was a good laugh for some in the 1970s. We've covered some of this, and that the story of the African slave trade just did not occur and happen in the manner described. Again, this painting is the ultimate benchmark for me in GTR. It showcases literally black melanated Europeans in the 18th century, or I say the 8th century, because of the time difference with the 1,000 years added. So we have, again, King of Poland, Prince of Sweden, Count in Germany, and we have a Prince of Poland whose castle I visited, and all the faces have been taken off just to obviously take away and delete the obviously black negroid features of those persons depicted in the castle, which this black noble owned. So that's one news update. And the other thing is in Wikipedia, I know some people use WikiWand, Wikipedia. I've noticed in looking at the histories and the biographies, and we're going to come to some of this here when we look at the colonization of Africa, that Wikipedia no longer is WikiWand and Wikigroup. This is the internet's free library and free encyclopedia. In this modern age, it makes no sense to produce bound encyclopedias. When I was growing up, I enjoyed reading encyclopedias, but I love the smell of those books, the Britannica or New Standard encyclopedias. But the information is changing so rapidly that no one's going to invest in printed form of encyclopedias anymore. By the time you actually go to print, that information is already stale dated. So the Wiki group, I approached them, being nice. I approached them. This is how I approached the Bayeux Tapestry Museum and also the Dresden Museum of Ethnology. And I approached Wiki Group and their legal team, and I said, well, and I asked, how come? How do you verify these sources? You have so many images that just claim that history is as you present it. So you have a white Jesus, you have white Bible characters, you have white nobles, and just putting to them the basic stats, common sense numbers, that there's no way that you have 8 to 10% non-Hispanic whites. There's no way you have that number today out of 8.2 billion, and you regress it, and you have all of these characters that you claim. And I said, at some point, you're going to set yourself up, Wiki, to lawsuits, to actions by people whose family is there concerned. Because say, I'm a McDonald. You could have a McLean, you could have a McLaren, you could have a McDougall, some other family who is probably involved in some kind of ancestral tracing tied to perhaps a land grant. Probably they're going to be disputing property. And you could be embroiled in some action because you claim that this history is accurate. I mean, at some point, you need historical accuracy. So what Wiki has done, again, I'm not saying I'm the only one who's just led them to this decision. They have been consistently tightening up the reins when it comes to ancestral history. So if you go and you pick any figure in history, you may get to a father, you may possibly get to a grandfather, but no more. They would speak in generic language like X was the son of a vicar, X was the son of a farmer from Scotland. They used to have so many bios attached to persons, notable persons. I mean, you have persons who are famous persons. You would have bios going back for father generational tracing, and I saw this over the last couple of years. And I'm sure if you were using the wiki sources, that you too would have seen that you could really go back with the hyperlinks, and you can go back in time in the various centuries by just combing back who was this famous person's father, grandfather, great grandfather, and so forth and so forth. This is a broad-based change that I've seen, and rightfully so, to the GTR's credit, if we're taking credit for that, because you cannot just make it up. And you could certainly be in a situation where it's tied to some economic case, it's tied to probably a property dispute over relatives and families and cross borders, different countries, and then they're claiming, assuming that this guy would then be the progenitor. And in a lot of cases, it's just not true. The GTR conclusions that we reached two conclusions. First, that this planet was melanated just going back 200 years before those meadow cabbage babies appeared in the 1800s, with gestational cycles of just 1 month versus 9 months. So they were producing a lot more, and there were different types: Asian, Chinese, haplogroup O, haplogroup R, and in women, M and H. I don't take any great pride in saying this and speaking this. It's the truth, but my wife is a haplogroup H, and my mom is a haplogroup M. My father, of course, had suspected, because we don't know for sure, but the maternal grandfather, his grandfather, George Potts, was white, suspected to be a haplogroup R. My mother's father, Ivan Ezekiel Ramlal, was a haplogroup O. And then my wife's father, Arkadeusz Sidursky, he is a haplogroup R. So there's a lot of family members who we have a combination of R's and O's and M's and H's. And those are then those called other, say, persons. We could say visitors. We could say that they're non-European, that they were meadow babies, a bit of euphemism to soften the blow, but that's the polar end. On the other end, we would have the haplogroups E, A, B, C, D in men, and L in women. And everyone else would be in the middle. And one of the notable haplogroups that I've seen in Canada in my research would be the haplogroup I, and that would be in the middle. The I's, when you're presented with people who are obviously mixed between the polar ends, I have seen a lot of clan chiefs, suspected clan chiefs in McDonald's from Canada, Cape Breton, to be haplogroup I. And so that's, again, for scientists to try and agree upon, but the research is pointing in that way. We have the polar ends, and as one reporter said, because I'm right now engaged in putting together a series of pieces coming from the Mandela Leadership Summit in Kenya during the first week of February, and reporters and people who are excited, interested in my work, here it is that we're at episode 11. They will be interviewing me and building up cases where we've set a broad framework. We have established some conclusions on research. So it is that we are going to take specific dives into different lines, family lines, going and looking at Africa, because I have not done any deep dives in Africa as yet. Focus has been on Europe, on the UK, the Caribbean, and in Canada, some respects the USA, but I've not looked at Africa, because Africa, again, has been a continent that's been largely mysterious in terms of the current labeling, different names, and then Nigeria being not around during the time of Christ, clearly, being a country that had as its first capital Calabar. And so we have a lot of renaming of places and a lot of interests over the last 200 years that have been deeply embedded. So this episode 11, it's looking at the colonization of Africa and what that all means. And why was it so important to rush into Africa? We've been painted a sort of narrative about the world, and GTR timeline seeks to look at two conclusions, and have those conclusions as our yardstick. So we have two measuring sticks here. One on the time factor. We are not in 2026, but rather 1026, because 582 became 1582. The Middle Ages were never dark, they just never existed. And the second bit, But 200 years ago, our whole planet was melanated, was black before the emergence of those meadow cabbage babies. Gestational cycle was 1 month barely versus 9 months. So they produced a lot. And we had a mixed population, that occurred as a result in the last 200 years. So why the scramble for Africa? And we've been presented with, well, we had all this new technology that was just created in the last 200 years. I grew up on it, just searching and finding, how come man was sleepy? 1 minute he was riding an animal, and then another minute he just put down the animal, whether it be a horse, a mule, camel, and just decided just to go to the machine, to just ride a machine, use a machine for transport. It just happened like that. It was, what makes more sense, it was a gradual buildup of cumulative knowledge over 1,000+ years. And we speak up in the Tartarian, the era where they had advanced technology, a sort of Wakandian sort of style of living, black, melanated, free energy, moving sidewalks, airships, frequencies that can heal the body and cure you of diseases. We had a near perfect world that was interrupted by mud floods. And then there was a need to then repopulate the world at the end of the, call it 700s. We know we had a lot of big events like the American Revolution, Britain versus the Americas, and we had the French Revolution, and I believe that those things were real. But what happened afterwards, this great reset that the Freemasons talk about, that Guy Anderson talks about in his books on the meadow cabbage babies, on the global reset, on even Tesla. And he wrote about Tesla. Tesla was never one person. Tesla would be representing the technology borrowed and taken from a black Wakandian Tartarian world. So this is the world that existed before the 800s, 1800s. So we're trying to reconcile the whole picture here. Colonization of Africa, according to the records presented today, is that the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, they went packing into Africa. And Africa, the northern end, you can see here we have Tunisia, Algeria. The north was occupied primarily by the French, and then the southern parts really would be the Dutch. And then, later on the British came and they occupied. So both ends of Africa, the northern end and the southern end. But if you look at the countries which occupied Africa as of 1939, all of this really happened in the last Berlin Conference, in the 1800s. They decided who was going to get Africa into set rules of fair play so that there would be no double dealing. And of course, we had Belgium coming to the picture, and King Leopold and his, slaughter and massacre in the Congo. And we have all these stories, horrific stories that I've told. And driving force, why? What's it? You keep asking this question. It's almost rhetorical. Why go into Africa? What's happening? Why are you going to go in and displace and destroy the continent? And obviously there were advanced civilizations, there were advanced buildings. And why go in? What's the push to do all of that in order to acquire wealth and extract wealth from Africa in order to benefit Europe? And as a newly constituted Europe, which was clearly white, was Caucasian, but the original people of Europe, according to GTR, according to the painting, according to primary sources, was a black melanated Europe. So this map of Africa carved up into pieces. We have the Italians, they're claiming part territory in green. We have the Spain, which is yellow. We have again more green, dark green, Portugal. We have France claiming a large swath and lands in Africa, denoted by purple. We have Britain in this sort of peachy color. We have Belgium, of course, almost like a beige color, and South Africa and Egypt. Notice that of all of this, which countries are European, are truly European? Spain, clearly, Italy, France, Britain, clearly, Portugal, Belgium. And of this list, we have, as of 1939, or rather 939, but 1939, we have barely 100 years ago, we have Egypt and South Africa as separate territories, non-European. So South Africa was this epicenter. And when you look at the numbers, there was at a high point, they say, 6 million whites overall in Africa. And you have to also consider the other migrant groups, which are non-Black, because according to the GTR record and the cabbage babies, we had Asian, haplogroup O, we had Asian, and we had white. So we had two types of meadow cabbage babies entering into the world. We have Indians going to the Caribbean. We have Indians, and this is all travel within the 1800s or 800s. We have migrations into Africa to work the railways, to build railroads, and to populate. Even Indians today remain. And the Indian migration was probably about 2 or 3 million. And the white migration from, they said, Europe would be at a high point 6 million, but remains around 4 million. So in total, we're talking about 6 million people. Not a whole lot. If you're truly conquering and exercising dominion over a place, shouldn't you at least have more persons? How is it that these colonies just adopted the languages? Did you beat and force your will? Did you have so many missionaries? Did you have people assimilate, stay, and live? Yes, you had people living in Africa. Clearly, people have been born, whites have been born in probably pretty much all the countries there in Africa, but a concentration remains in South Africa. And remember the words of Freemason Guy Anderson, who I reached out to, and I'll get lucky and he'll join this show, one of my shows, is that the white South Africans came as meadow babies in cages, in small cages. They were not taken as adults. So they were brought and transported in those cages. There are drawings and schematics of these cages, what they looked like. Looked almost like animal cages, but they're brought, a few of them, they were tiny, at a time to South Africa, and you had a large population. So on this map, we have Egypt being one of a separate place that is ruling Africa. And we know there's a pivotal country in the history of the world. Egypt was a superpower. Egypt ruled the world back in BC 2000 to around BC 1500. Then the Israelites, the Black Israelites and Hebrews, they left and left Egypt, and no longer had free labor. But Egypt is showing here as one of the colonizers. And South Africa is clearly not a European country, but it's showing up on this map in 1939 as a colonizer. It says colonial rule of Africa. And one has to say, well, we know the need to control Egypt because Egypt represented a lot of the artifacts, the history. I mean, no doubt the noses and figures and all those images were etched and changed. I mean, this is a massive, I'm trying to process and just understand what effort, how much effort just took place to get all of this whitewashed and scrubbed. We know, and we hint, and the Freemasons again talk about the wars, the World War I and II, strategically launched. What were they fighting over? It's the rise of, fascism and, Nazi Germany and, the horrors of that war. But in London, in places where you had bombings, one building would be bombed, completely destroyed. And then the other one next door, it's like totally missed. And, was it just that coordinated where these artifacts and these buildings, which were Tartarian, that reflected Black technology and even imagery, that it would just be destroyed in these world wars as a literal cover up? This is of grand scale. Again, my trip to North Africa, Tunisia, Algeria, all of the French part, and touching into the Italian parts of Northern Africa. We see the whitewashing, we see the removal of 2,000 faces and images of the artifacts. I've seen it, I've taken photographs. And when I went now to Wales, UK, you could see what Romans looked like as black, melanated, broad nose, thick lips, melanated people. So this is a take on Africa and colonization. They said it was a rush to acquire the wealth of Africa, which they say today we have most of it is still remaining. We have Africa probably about 70, some people say as much as 90% remains, but they had to secure for themselves resources in order to ensure that they're, and this is even in tandem with the Caribbean. Look, those same countries. We have the Spanish Caribbean, not so much Italy, but French Caribbean, Haiti. We have the English-speaking Caribbean. We have Portuguese as in Brazil. We have, Belgium, not really, but clearly we have the Dutch. I mean, Dutch is not represented here, but they were early into South Africa. And then, they came and colonized Africa, they said, before others, but they have the Dutch-speaking Caribbean today. So you have these countries, these specific countries, which they too have siphoned off natives, So when you hear someone from Algeria, from Burkina Faso, from Central African Republic that's speaking a foreign non-African language such as French, and if you hear someone in Angola that's speaking Portuguese, and you name it, Kenya, we have a lot of English speakers. You have to take a pause and think, are these people natives? How is it that they were able to, how is it that we don't have any nations in the West speaking an African language, dialect at all? How come we have so quick an assimilation of European type of languages being spoken in parts of Africa today? Again, was it simply missionaries coming, pastors and reverends coming? Did they come and say, well, we're going to come and you're going to speak our language. We're going to insist on it or you'll be punished. I mean, what were the stories? How did they force the large millions of, now they say, Africans to adopt those languages? Because it's hard. I'm living in Poland. I struggle. I speak English. And at a certain age, it is more difficult to even change and switch your tongue. The idioms and just, the entrenched languages, it's easier to adopt when you're younger. So how did they accomplish this? And so few numbers. Again, between the Indian migration and the white migration, we're talking about in the high point of 6 million whites, but one cannot really judge with today 4 million whites, and then around 2 million Indians. So 6 million, and around it's 7 million, but that's small compared to Africa today has well over 1 and 1.5 billion. By the next 20 years, they said it's like 1 in 3 persons globally will be African. And we know that a lot of things have been done to curtail and cull Black population. I don't even have to go into that again. We know of the efforts made to degrade, to impoverish, to destroy, to shoot, to maim, and the whole rumors about types of drugs, types of medications, sterilization procedures. I mean, there's a whole lot. This is not a show about conspiracies, but you could just see that certain things act against melanin and melanated people and their interests. And there's a rush by Gates and all some of these people to rush into Africa. Oh, let's go get some seedlings. Let's get some GMO. Let's get some, experiments, and let's go into villages. Let's go into remote parts and see what they're doing. But what exactly they're doing, coming bearing gifts, vaccines and other things, which right now, as COVID has shown, it comes with a lot of side effects. And we don't know the horrors and what has been truly done to cull that population. And it certainly should have been larger. We should have had more than 2 billion right now in Africa alone. We should have more than 3 billion. But there's still a half, 50%, a majority of melanated in some shape or form on the planet today. But it would have been higher given the measures taken in the last 100 years. Even the Jim Crow tactics, where they constantly berate and they demean Blacks by showing them as eating watermelon and talking about candies. And I made, posts on Facebook, even tried to get, restricted on 1 or 2 posts because they said, oh, well, this is too graphic. But it is Jim Crow. If they're in museums, there's stuff that even exists today, even in Poland and in Europe, talking about Black Negro coffee and blackface being used again, and the N word used in so many products, stamped on soaps, on licorice, on candy, on tobacco, in game boards, just that use of the N word, and this has been carried out for decades, but now not more because we now live in a rights society. But why is it you had all that taking place at the same time? The exploitation and extraction of resources. And I keep saying, but the colonizers, who are they? The colonizers were Black. And they're saying, well, Dr. McDonald, wait a second, how do you know? How do you know that they're Black? Well, I am going to do some interesting deep dives into some of the personalities which appear in African society. So right now, I'm going to take a bit of a break and I'm going to shift to those personalities because they ask the question, how do you know, Dr. McDonald, that the colonizers were Black? And how do you know? Well, looking at the numbers, we have barely 6 million Indians and whites coming to Africa. You have been possessing Africa for 500 years, from the 1500s, 500s. You've been possessing Africa. So it is colonization has taken place, and it's taking place in the Caribbean and in Africa. How come you did not move a lot more people? Look what happened in America. In America, every Tom, Dick, and Harry just went off into America for the New World. and to experience America, where you have 300 plus million Americans, North Americans today, Americans today. Why is it you didn't have that same flooding into Africa? Because you want to dominate, and Africa is rich in lots of resources, in food and other things. But why just bring that few persons there? How can you control this continent? How could you be able to pull it off? We know there's been a lot of coups, a lot of wars, brutality. I mean, King Leopold and the slaughter in the Congo, and people just gloss it over and not remember the atrocities committed. But like America, that was a springboard where a lot of these meadow cabbage babies came off, and most of them came through Ellis Island, went through New York, and they flooded into the States. And we had orphan trains, and we had Sears and Roebuck catalogs listing the babies with the postcards. We had babies listed for $3. $3 you can get a baby. We had the world fairs and the incubators and those trade shows where they could showcase and flip you a postcard, which is a marketing tool to show what you're getting. And before Amazon, you could have a baby delivered door to door for $3, $3 American. That's all in the literature. It's all out. It's all in print. There are adverts, there are clippings, there are a lot of documentation and primary sources coming out to support people writing to each other, people expressing their comments on videos and saying about their great-grandparents or their grandparents, what they remember in asylums, in orphanages. Why did they have so many orphanages? What was the need? And why did you have to have Black women breastfeed a lot of these children? We know the nutrients in mother's milk, the cholesterol. Why is it? We need to ask those questions. So we're going to be prepared to take a deep dive into those persons who were figures in the African continent, which they said were of European ancestry. But the numbers are not looking good for a territory that you have colonized for 500 years. Not so. It's just 200 years barely ago. But according to the record, Africa has been colonized for 500 years. Which makes no sense. Why is it you totally only have about barely 6 million people of non-Black, of non-African ancestry occupying such a vast area? And if you are dominating a place like that, you should have a lot more. But my thing is, they had to sell that lie, and they had to use the numbers, the baby-making machines, to stockpile Europe. And we know the Iron Curtain was down from the Second World War. How many babies were produced since the fall of the Second World War. The Iron Curtain came down and then lifted, and you had all these countries within the USSR with bursting to the seams in a lot of people in Europe, and Europe's population just grew and expanded overnight. I mean, people having babies around the clock, men checking in and doing their stuff and their business around the clock, like some factory workers making babies. No, I mean, you had baby making machines, mechanisms. This made more sense. The more you think about it, you look at the numbers, Russia's population as it grew, and the outward Eastern European countries that just skyrocketed, and yet people in America are still saying, well, my ancestor is from Ukraine. My ancestor is from Czech Republic. My ancestor is from Slovakia or wherever, Hungary. But then there are problems in connecting to those relatives. And I've shown that in prior episodes where the McDonald's, the white McDonald's, just could not and cannot connect to other white or Black, for that matter, McDonald's. So as one reporter said, using the DNA, we will find solutions, but we must use the DNA in order to establish the truth, in order to test the sources, rightfully so. And I use independent labs in Germany, in Poland, and I really have discovered so much when I use those independent labs, when I see so much matches and matching power, especially with melanated people of haplogroups E, and by extension, A, B, C, D, which would be the original Black man. I have not focused on L, which is female. I will at some point. Right now, the focus of the study is on the male, oftenly ignored haplogroup. And so I'm looking only at the Y chromosomal research. So I will dive into the individual white European personalities found on the African continent. And let me do a deep dive into their ancestry and into their roots. So now we're going to look at four persons of white ancestry, European ancestry, who are connected to Africa. So the first person that I'm looking at is Sir Harry Smith. Now, Sir Harry Smith, and you see a image of Sir Harry. He was born 1787 in England and died in 1860. Now, when you look at the bio of Sir Harry Smith, you are not going to see any parents. I have searched high and low for his parents and could not find anything relating to his parents. So this is Sir Harry Smith. I looked at the genealogy sites. Yes, he was a military person and he died in London, but absolutely no background to this man. He just fell from the sky and born in 1787. Now, whether he was white or black, if he was in the UK in the 1700s, he definitely would be a brother. He would be black. And that's the first person. He was a governor. Let me look closely into his profile. So he was connected to the African colonies, Cape Colony, and he was involved in the Napoleonic Wars. Now, as I said again in a prior episode, that Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte was a black person, as described in books. I can't say it enough for our French-speaking audience that Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, who ruled France, and this would be up to his exile, Elba, in the early 1800s. But after the collapse of the French Empire in the 1790s or 790s, then Emperor Napoleon, he ruled France and pretty much the known world because of France's dominance in the very early part of the 1800s, or rather 800s. So here it is that this gentleman was involved in a veteran of the Napoleonic Wars, and he was also responsible for governing parts of Africa. Now, the second person I wanted to talk about would be Cecil Rhodes. And let me adjust this. So we all heard about Cecil Rhodes. How could we not? From the Rhodes scholarships, as we know, Cecil Rhodes was born in England around 1853, and he died in South Africa in 1902. Let me So Cecil Rhodes, he had some sort of a very controversial background because he was not married, didn't have any kids, suspected that he was gay, which would not be very pleasant during that century. His parents, the Reverend Francis William Rhodes, 1807, and Louisa Peacock was his mom. So here's a man who made a lot of money in Africa. He eventually died in South Africa. He was involved in Oxford, and he was a patron. He established the famous Rhodes Scholarship. But in Jamaica, we had a lot of other sort of Rhodes or Rhodes chains in Jamaica. So it's something that I've been tracking both the Rhodes names and the Rhodes James name in Jamaica. And one of the Rhodes James, William Rhodes James, he died in Trelawney. Need to know the connection, but he's buried in a mausoleum. Trying to gain access to that now. It's on a horse farm that was destroyed in the last hurricane in Melissa. But we don't know the haplogroup for this man. We have been told that the Rhodes haplogroup would be I. So present something here. So haplogroup I, which I said before, it's a combination, it's the middle hybrid category between original mankind and those meadow cabbage babies. And a lot of I's happen to be clam chiefs and McDonald's in Canada. So Rhodes family in general, not sure this particular man, Cecil Rhodes, was a haplogroup I, but we don't know much about his great-grandfathers. I mean, there's an image of his father, and I will show you right now. We have Cecil Rhodes. We have his father, Francis William Rhodes. That's a portrait of Francis William Rhodes, 1807. But nothing after that. When his grandfather was William Rhodes, supposedly, in 1774. And once we enter the 1700s, my antennas really go up. And these are Hebrew-sounding names. You know, Samuel, and 1736 England. And Thomas, come on. Doubting Thomas, disciple. We're all biblical names, Hebrews. And then there's William, it's a common English name. And then it ends. It just stops in 1689. But I'm really not sure. Here, this part, he was christened in St. Mary. Again, the name we found in Jamaica, St. Mary in England, Cheshire, England. But what is not really known here is the haplogroup. We don't know Cecil's haplogroup, and we can't test, just like the case of the McDonalds. Sir John McDonald looked like my great-grandfather Daniel. There are no living male descendants. There's none. We cannot do any testing and know what his haplogroup was in this case. It could have been E, but I'm assuming that he was an R. So then with so much might and power, which is common, because a lot of the land barons, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds seem to be haplogroup E. And not sure about the Rockefeller family, but a lot of the Morgans, the Rockefellers, and the Vanderbilts, and all these persons around the world that just accumulated vast sums of money in the last 100 years. A lot of them would be Caucasian, but the haplogroups largely would be R. And R, like O, would be meadow cabbage babies. So they would be inheriting from the displaced blacks, inheriting from Black Europe. So they're inheriting from lands that have been taken, stolen from Black Europeans. And that's pretty much what the Industrial Revolution is about. Not making up something new, but taking from obviously a Black indigenous population, claiming it as your own, and enslaving and displacing a lot of Blacks, shifting them to the Caribbean, shifting them into Africa. And so that's Cecil Rhodes. So recap. Sir Harry Smith, first baronet, a military man, born in 1787. I'm not sure about that. You're going into the 1700s, you are incurring the GTR wrath. That is territory that's Black, and he would have had to have been melanated if he was really a true character figure. Cecil Rhodes, I don't know, the jury is out. He could have been an E, we don't know. They say the Rhodes surname is haplogroup I, which would make him a hybrid, neither cabbage, neither original Black mankind. He is just in the middle. And the next person we'd want to go to would be Guy Scott. So let me share. And who was Guy Scott? Guy Lindsay Scott. And he was born in Zambia, and his father was a medical doctor called Alexander or Alec. But I tried to do a deep dive, and this is a Scottish doctor who moved his family over to Africa, to Zambia. Question marks. Who was the mother? What was the mother's name? Grace? Grace what? Grace Scott? Grace question mark. We don't know. But Guy Lindsay Scott, he was a statesman, he was a politician, and we don't know much about his background and who he was. I looked at the Genie site. It says here that Dr. Scott represented African interests in the colonial parliament. His background is mysterious. We don't know who Alec's parents were. We know that his son, Guy Lindsay Scott, elected vice president of Zambia in 2011, promoted to the president after the demise of Michael Sata, becoming the first white leader of an African country since F.W. de Klerk. And he was involved in African politics, but we don't know much about his background, and we don't know his haplogroup. I tried to really search for it, scoured the genealogy sites, but I just could not find anything on him. So it's a big question mark. Next, we're going to go to the famous Frederick William de Klerk of South Africa. I don't think he needs any introduction, but I will go nonetheless. So this famous leader in South Africa was born in Joburg, South Africa in 1936. And you could see there, the genealogy site has identified his mom as an H. So his mom was a white woman. Again, that's the cabbage baby haplo, which is H. He was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 93. And let's see who his parents were. Okay, Johannes de Klerk. And he was also born in South Africa in 1903. Let's see the haplogroup. They don't mention the paternal, not at all. Let's see who his father was. And we have an image, 1875, of William Johannes de Klerk, born in South Africa. Once again, let's check the haplogroups. H, his mom was an H. How about the father? Silence, nothing. Then we go to William's father, Baron Jacobus de Klerk, in 1826, South Africa, once more. Let's check the haplogroups. Now that would be a U, but that's MT, so that's maternal. They don't like the paternal line. They don't like the Jews of today, the Hebrews. You need a court order. They don't like to test the Y. The Y is taboo. So it's neither original, it's neither cabbage. U is a mixed haplogroup. Let's see who his father is going to be. Johannes Cornelius de Klerk, 1791 in South Africa. No DNA markers. His father would be Barend de Klerk, born in South Africa, once more, 1742. And so this must be Barend Sr., 1716 in South Africa. No DNA markers. And then his father. Oh, again, a nice biblical name. How I love it. Oh, we look at Cecil Rhodes. We see names like Samuel and Thomas, good old biblical names. So we have Abraham de Klerk. And the DNA markers would be K. K is again in the middle. K haplogroup is in the middle. Neither cabbage, neither original man, K. And he was born in 1671 in the Netherlands. So this is where that Dutch play comes into effect, the Dutch. But the Dutch were black people. And the son of Pieter, Abraham. Wow, another, just the biblical Hebrew names just kicking off. 1643 in the Netherlands. Okay, can I go further? That's 1643. That's rich. Black Hebrew names. Black Hebrew names. Let's open up Peter Abraham's. Another Abraham, Abraham Sr. in the Netherlands, born 1610. And Jan Abraham Leclerc, 1564 in the Netherlands. Barbel Leclerc, born in the Netherlands in 1575. What happened there? Just the trail is cold. Well, let me check another site. Let me see if I can go further back. Even before the Netherlands. The DNA marker, that's 1575. Well, according to this record, this Abraham is born in France, comes back to France. Do you realize of the 10 Germanic tribes that sacked Rome, the Franks were the main tribe to have survived? When you look at Benelux, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, it's all Franks, the old Frankish, black Frankish empire. And all the others, the Saxons are still alive. Yes, that's UK. But some of the tribes were just destroyed, absorbed. Again, it's even biblical that 3 tribes were uprooted, as vision with 3 horns uprooted at the time that Rome was sacked. So they really only had about 7 Germanic tribes after the Roman conquest in 476. This is fun stuff, fascinating. So this Abraham Leclerc Sr., nice Hebrew, black Hebrew sounding name, was born in 1575 in France. And you notice the domination of France in Africa. Haiti was called the Pearl of the Caribbean. The Pearl of the Caribbean. They were really first and foremost in colonizing, in establishing the dominance because of the black. When I went to Africa and did my DNA testing, of course, I found a lot of European connections, but there's one significant, a boat captain, when I went to Madagascar. Now, Madagascar is right off the coast of the continent, and it's influenced by some Indian, Mauritius, other India and Africa. This boat captain, Philippe Stefani, is on my Facebook profile. When I did the deep dive in the DNA, he's haplogroup E. His father is like 4 generations deep in the Congo, Congolese, and his mom is Malagasy. So when I did a deep dive, I had cousins. He had very few African connections. I'm not talking autosomal. I'm talking big Y. When you look back in time on the Y chromosome over 1,000 years, he had Black Irish, he had Normandy French, he had Scandinavian, he had Middle Eastern, and including Bin Yaya, which is Hebrew, all in haplogroup E. And even like myself, Al-Ali, the more Islamic roots, which are black, haplogroup E. So that's wonderful discovery. That was 2 years ago. And that was my French, African, Malagasy connection, which was firmly established, covering 4 generations deep in the Congo on the male paternal Y chromosome side. That was brilliant discovery. So to recap, with all these black Hebrew names, we had 4 figures that were colonizers. I just don't like the word colonizer, because anytime people, and you have Joshua Mapunga, I like this man, I respect this man, and he talks about colonizers. We have PLO Lumumba, and he talks about colonizers. We have Jacob Zuma, former President Zuma, who I met in Burkina Faso, talking about colonizers. But the colonizers were Black people. Again, the list to recap: 4 persons taken from the fire. We have Sir Harry Smith, 1st Baronet, born 1787 in England. No parents, like a ghost of a man, military man, ruled part of Africa. We have Cecil Rhodes from the Rhodes Scholarship, and he was born in 1853 in England, died in 1902 in South Africa. Yes, he has parents, Reverend Francis William Rhodes, and his mother was a Louisa Peacock. So we have some parental information, and we could go back a few generations to Samuel and Thomas, very Hebrew biblical names, and we do not know his definitive haplogroup. It's rumored to be an I, but I is a hybrid between the extremes, between cabbage, R, and E, for example. It's in the middle, but we don't know his male haplogroup. We have Guy Scott, born in 1944 in Zambia. Again, his father was Alexander Scott, mom with no last name, just referred to as Grace. That's not helpful. He was a Scottish doctor, couldn't find any information on the father. Was he from Scotland? Or just, again, cabbage baby linked? No haplogroup for Guy Scott. And then the former president of South Africa, Frederick Willem de Klerk. And, Mandela is an E, and Mandela took over as president, rightfully so. I don't know who this man was, the clerk. What was he? I mean, we all know of him. He won the Nobel Prize, but was he an E? We know his mom was H. That's confirmed. But there's absolutely a complete scrub on his paternal lines. And we see the names like Abraham, and going back for centuries to the 1500s, or say 500s, and touching on France. So we see connections to Europe, but we do not know. We suspect that, of course, if his lineage is correct, he would have had a Black. Case in point, we have Putin. Vladimir Putin today is a haplogroup E. Now, would you say that Vladimir Putin of Russia is sub-Saharan? He's an E. Just like Einstein, just like the Egyptian kings, including the boy king Tutankhamun, including the Wright brothers that gave us the airplane, including President Woodrow Wilson, including Hitler, including Emperor Napoleon. There's so many E's. If you test 10 men, guaranteed that at least half, close to half, would be E's. And E should be A, according to Harvard scholar Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, who wrote the book Traced. The first haplo, the most populous, the oldest, would be E, and E should be given the assignment of A. But it's not done to confuse, to distort, to just make it just as opaque as possible, less clear, less clarity for the mass. So we have to do our deep dives, and I will be doing more of these deep dives on specific persons in the colonization of Africa. Why was it colonized? And just for minerals extraction, why was there a rush to colonize Africa? What was the burning desire to do that as they told this story, this wicked lie of a white Europe and the scrub, a total scrub of history? So we need to test those sources. Isn't it more comforting to know that the sons and daughters of Africa built Europe, gave us all our technologies, all the comforts we have are attributed to sons and daughters of Africa? And with that, I leave it there and on to the next episode 12. Good day, good night. Thank you for watching.
GTR Publishing.
A Data Dreads production.